is no God.
Then why are we whispering?
Stand by to receive our transmission. Logic clearly dictates.
If you're an atheist, scream atheist!
I mean, but what is an atheist?
An atheist is someone who doesn't quite believe that there is somebody out there, some God out there.
Well, then to me, you're an idiot.
From beautiful downtown Infidelphia in the state of apostasy, and recorded for you from the piss-stained platform of a dank and stinky subway stop.
I'm in the dark here!
Somewhere on the rhetorical railway to psychological emancipation, it's the Atheist Underground. Boarding now and making all necessary stops in the Infidelphia metropolitan area. The fare is only $1, and you can pay the fare at patreon.com. Look for Atheist Underground.
I got no life!
The Atheist Underground is a public service from the Intellectual Transit Authority, moving your mind to places it was too weak to go by itself.
Welcome to the Underground. Next stop, New Evidence. New Evidence is next.
Thanks for riding, and do mind the gap as you exit. I'm your conductor, the Irreverend Rob, and on behalf of the staff of the Atheist Underground, welcome to New Evidence, Infidelphia County, state of apostasy, here in these United States of Agnostica. Today's stop is a science-heavy one. In fact, the village of New Evidence was founded by a scientist who emigrated to Agnostica from Evidence in the old country. Then he moved west, kept naming towns after evidence. New evidence, very new evidence, really new evidence, before finally settling at the end of his life in pure conjecture. On today's stop, science reporter Nicholi debuts his new bit.
New evidence suggests.
We'll have a chat with director Ann Reed of the NCSE,
the National Center for Science Education.
We'll also debut profiles in pedophilia. And our old buddy Hellmo takes his first crap.
Good luck with your first crap.
And of course, we'll check the station Kiosk, where people can post news and events from around the global secular movement. This week, right up there next to one of those fringe tag paper tear off my number if you need a maid thingies, and some post-college neo-hippie looking for a roommate.
Special thanks at this stop to Matt Thespian, our first patron on Patreon, who earned himself a mention with his generous pledge. Remember to look for AU on Patreon and pay the fare. It's only $1, and otherwise, you're a scofflaw and freeloader. Come on, man.
Now here's AU science reporter Nicholi with
New evidence suggests.
Hello, I'm AU science reporter Nicholi with
New evidence suggests.
So here goes the first one.
New evidence suggests.
Female doctors are better than male doctors. According to new research, female physicians tend to provide higher quality medical care than males. If male physicians were as adept as females, some 32,000 fewer Americans would die every year among Medicare patients alone. In research published in the journal JAMA Internal Medicine, researchers from Harvard University reviewed the records of 1,583,028 hospital visits among Medicare patients. Within 30 days of arriving at the hospital, rates of death and readmission were significantly lower when the patient's doctor was a female. This was true for people with medical conditions of all sorts and severities, and held true even for patients who were randomly assigned to a physician when they arrived. People treated by a female had a 4% lower relative risk of dying and 5% lower relative risk of being admitted to the hospital again in the following month. To explain the discrepancy, the researchers point to past studies that have shown female physicians are more likely to provide preventative care, psychosocial counseling, and to data that says female physicians have a more patient-centered communication style, are more encouraging and reassuring, and have longer visits than male physicians. All of this means, of course, that they make more money, right? No. Salaries for female physicians average some $19,879, 8% lower than male physicians.
Yeah, all of this not really news to me. I can tell you as an aging male 2 things about women doctors. Smaller fingers, softer hands.
New evidence suggests
Alien megastructures have not, in fact, been found.
Bad news for the alien origins theory crowd.
When it comes to the hunt for extraterrestrial life, perhaps the biggest dream we have isn't to encounter a civilization like our own, but one far more advanced. Perhaps looking for evidence that aliens had altered an entire world or the space around a star would be the miracle signal we've been longing for. The Kepler spacecraft was able to observe and monitor the brightness of more than 100,000 stars at once over timescales of multiple years. Practically all of the variations seen were regular, periodic, and predictable. But one star,
Star KIC 8462852,
Tabby star, is different. Its flux drops off by incredibly large amounts, and it does so with no discernible period. 2 new independent studies have come out to explain the phenomenon in natural terms. The first one is called the avalanche model and is extremely consistent with what's been observed. It theorizes a star that's intensely active in some poorly understood way, giving off periodic massive outbursts, avalanches, that cause a dimming of the light. A second paper suggests a massive object surrounded by a dust cloud like a giant comet. If they start a long distance from the star, emitting a tail and a coma, and then transit in front of the star, they could cause these large flux dips. The signal would also be aperiodic. This hypothesis can also easily fit the observed data showing that there are 2 potential paths to solving this problem, neither of which invokes aliens.
E.T. phone home.
To discover an alien species much more advanced than our own would be incredible, but before embracing anything along those lines, all the natural explanations need to be ruled out.
Sound like anything else we've heard of?
new evidence suggests.
The tendency for people to cling to irrational beliefs may have a physiological cause. How often do you find yourself in a debate or discussion with someone and found that no matter what, they want to cling to their beliefs? It's a pretty frustrating experience. Well, there's a reason for that. Recently, there was a neuroimaging study done to show what activity in the brain takes place when someone clings to their beliefs in the face of counter evidence. And one of the methods they used to measure this was through blood oxygen signals in the brain. When those who changed their mind the least were confronted with counter evidence to their beliefs, they would experience negative emotions. In an effort to reduce these negative emotions, people would try to minimize the impact of the challenging evidence by discounting its source, forming counter-arguments, socially validating the original attitude, or selectively avoiding the new information. The degree to which such rationalization occurs depends upon several factors, but the personal significance of the challenged belief appears to be crucial. Specifically, beliefs that relate to one's social identity are likely to be more difficult to change.
So, you're gonna be stubborn, huh?
In other words, if you're too stubborn to change your mind, even in the face of facts, it's not your fault. You're just wired that way.
We actually got a hold of the scientists who did the study.
That's outstanding work, Nick. Dr. Jonas Kaplan, welcome to the show, and tell us your actual position.
I'm a research assistant professor at the Brain and Creativity Institute at the University of Southern California.
Does that make you a Trojan?
Yeah, it does.
Now, we synopsized the article and put it in layman's terms as best we could. We don't really need to go into the actual study as much as maybe the implications. Is this an innate physiological phenomenon, or does it develop in people as we get older?
Yeah, I mean, that's something we can't tell from this study. I don't think there's any reason to believe that it's innate. But part of what we think is happening here is a social phenomenon in that as we build our identity and our sense of who we are and we incorporate beliefs into that identity, they become really, really difficult to change, such that in order to change a given belief, you have to change not just that particular belief, but all the other beliefs and ideas you have that depend on it and are related to it. Your sense of who you are and your sense of who your friends think you are. You know, we've heard from people who have changed their beliefs, and there's often a big social cost to changing your mind. You know, some of the subjects in our study said, I can't really change my mind on this. All my friends think that I'm a liberal person, and what would they think if I changed my mind about abortion, for example?
Now, how are some people, I assume some people are affected less. Some people are more able to remove themselves from the phenomenon. Does that have anything to do with their physiological makeup, or are they simply able to understand that might be happening and step back from it a little bit? Does that make sense?
Yeah. Well, one of the findings in the study is that people who activated emotional regions of the brain more. So we looked at the amygdala, which is a brain structure that's important for all kinds of emotion, and including threat and other negative emotions, as well as the insular cortex, which is a part of the brain that processes feelings from the body, kind of integrates all of the information coming from the viscera of the body, and so it's really important for our feelings. And people who activated those brain structures more while they were being challenged were less likely to change their minds. And so I think that really shows us what the role of emotion is in all of this, that when we get really defensive and emotional, we feel a certain way, we have those negative feelings when we're challenged, that we become much more stubborn and defensive, and we're much less likely to be cognitively flexible.
So people who are more emotional in general are more susceptible.
Yeah, I think so.
What is the upshot? Is there a purpose, or is this just purely for the research, figuring out how the brain works?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's a little bit of both. On the one hand, we're definitely motivated by trying to figure out how the brain works, and that is a slow process. It's not something where we necessarily get useful answers with one study like this. This is just one study. And so this gives us clues that we then have to follow up on in additional research. And eventually the idea is that we hopefully get to an understanding of how this thing works in the brain. And then having such an understanding of how we work in the brain can help us respond to how we work. So if we understand what are the conditions that make it more or less likely for us to change our minds, then we can more easily put ourselves into those situations and encourage our cognitive flexibility when we think it's appropriate to do so. We chose politics because we wanted to find an arena where people were going to be really devoted to their beliefs. We could have used something like religion as well.
And I was happy to see that you chose liberal people who were unwilling to change in the face of evidence or facts presented to them. Was there a reason that you went that way?
Yeah, I mean, you're right. We all have those biases. It's certainly not restricted to one political party. The decision here was mostly out of convenience. It's just much easier for us to find people with strong liberal beliefs in the Los Angeles area. We'd like to do it with conservatives as well, and there are reasons to believe that conservatives might show some differences in some of these brain regions we were looking at. For example, conservatives tend to have larger amygdalae. And they may be more sensitive to things that they feel threatening. So, I do think that the results would be similar across people from political parties, but it doesn't mean there aren't any differences to be found either.
Now, do you, as a researcher, how do you deal with do your own biases come into play? Do you have to be careful when doing studies like this that you don't let some of your own feelings kind of get in the way of the
Yeah, sure. And, really, the way that I view science is that science is a set of procedures that is designed to remove our own biases from the process of finding the truth as much as possible.
You can find Dr. Kaplan's work at jonaskaplan.com or follow him on Twitter at Jonas_Kaplan. Great stuff from the world of science.
Mind the gap.
Hello, my name is Sir Hugo Bottomsley-Upton, and this is Profiles in Pedophilia. Today's profile comes to us straight from Providence. Providence, Rhode Island, that is, with the story of Joseph Abruzzese. Father Joseph was a diocesan Catholic priest in Providence, Rhode Island. He was ordained in 1990. He was placed on leave in 1993. He pleaded no contest in 1994 to second-degree sexual assault for grabbing and fondling a 16-year-old boy in a local park.
Oh my.
He was convicted and sentenced to 5 years probation and counseling. Father Joseph was shown as absent on leave in the 1995 to 2002 official Catholic directories. He is not listed after 2002, and his current status is unknown.
Oh my.
This has been Profiles in Pedophilia. Until next time, I'm Sir Hugo Bottomsley-Upton. All profiles are public record, provided by bishopaccountability.org.
Mind the gap.
Atheist Underground is honored to be speaking via Skype with a true warrior in the battle for science in America. Name, rank, and serial number, soldier.
My name is Ann Reed. I'm Executive Director of the National Center for Science Education, and we are based in Oakland, California.
And that's the NCSE Oakland. Sounds like one of those crime shows, doesn't it? And now NCSE Oakland, starring Ann Reed. Tell us about the history of the organization.
It has a long history. It started about 30 years ago when there were efforts across the country to try to balance, and you should put air quotes around that word, the teaching of evolution with the teaching of creationism. And there were a variety of different kinds of efforts, including trying to make sure that textbooks either didn't cover evolution or included creationism as an alternative. So a group of people started a set of committees of correspondence, they called themselves, in different parts of the country to help each other out in fighting these efforts, and eventually decided that they needed a national coordinator, and they then formed NCSE and hired Eugenie Scott as its first executive director. And she led the effort for about 27 years and retired 3 years ago. And I was very honored to step into her shoes, very distinguished shoes.
Indeed. Now, do you have a science background, or tell us where you came from to get to this point?
I do have a science background. I was for about 20 years a molecular biologist at the Walter Reed Army Medical Center and then the Armed Forces Institute of Pathology, where I worked on figuring out how to do molecular biology on the preserved tissues that the AFIP has that go back all the way to the Civil War. And spent most of my time there actually sequencing the virus that caused the 1918 influenza pandemic. Somewhere between 20 and 50 million people were killed by this virus, but they couldn't culture viruses back then. So these pathology samples were the only way to find it.
Wow. You've blown me away already. I feel like an insignificant talk show host. You're like a rocket scientist with molecular biology. That's fantastic.
Actually, that was a joke in my with my kids growing up. Whenever somebody would say, you don't have to be a rocket scientist, and I'd say, you mean you don't have to be a molecular biologist?
You mentioned the fight against creationism, and I'm shocked to learn that this is a 30-year-old fight. I never met a creationist until maybe 20 years ago when I came to the Midwest. it seems like a new phenomenon to me, but you're telling us that this has been a concern in schools since the 80s.
Absolutely. It really goes back, and it goes back before that. It really goes all the way back to the Scopes trial. But it seems that there was sort of a renaissance of creationism in the early 80s, that there was more of a movement to make sure that it stayed in the curriculum and stayed in textbooks.
What was that like for your kids going through school? Did they encounter less than great science education?
No, they absolutely didn't. I raised my kids in Washington, D.C., and they went to D.C. public schools through middle school and then went to Catholic high schools, and the Catholic high schools were fine on science. I never had any encounter with this. I went to a fairly conservative Presbyterian church. Bob Dole was a member, and John Glenn was a member. Occasionally someone would say, well, you don't believe that we descended from apes, do you? And I would say, well, that's not how I would say it, but yes. I knew about NCSE and I knew about Jeannie, and she'd actually come to speak at the Board on Life Sciences where I worked after I left the lab to talk about it. And that's when I started to realize the scope of the problem, that there really is a substantial minority of people in the United States who find evolution very threatening to their faith.
Now tell us specifically what NCSE is involved in to address the problem.
So that is evolving, if you'll excuse the pun. For the first, I'd say, 20 years of its existence, it was really caught up full time with putting out fires, with getting calls from parents or from teachers or from concerned citizens about issues in their communities where creationists were trying to make sure that creationism was taught alongside evolution, or that evolution wasn't taught at all. And we developed a very large toolbox of ways to help people in situations like that, that always the effort was to do so quietly and at the lowest possible level. If the situation could be resolved just by having the science teacher talk to the parent or talk to the parent and the principal, if it could be resolved there, we aimed to have it resolved there. If it needed to escalate to go to the school board or to the state science supervisor, then we would advise doing that. If it got to the point where you needed to make a splash in the press about what was going on, or you needed to get people to show up and testify before the school board to provide a counterweight to the creationist efforts, we'd counsel that, all the way up to is it time to file a lawsuit. So there were some very high-profile lawsuits that NCSE was involved in, culminating in the Kitzmiller v. Dover case in Pennsylvania, declaring that intelligent design was also fundamentally religious in nature and therefore unconstitutional to teach in public school science classrooms. Two things have happened in the past 5 years. One is that the organization has been getting fewer and fewer requests for help. And I don't know whether it's tied to the Dover decision, but I suspect that it is, that it's now very clear that you're going to get in trouble if you openly try to get intelligent design or creationism taught in your schools.
Aren't there a couple states that have already passed legislation allowing the teaching of creationism?
There are two, Tennessee and Louisiana. Our legal advisors suggest that those bills would be found unconstitutional if they were challenged. But at this point, no one has stepped forward to challenge them, and we haven't had any really blatant examples of someone going ahead and teaching creationism with that as their excuse. So they haven't really been tested. They're on the books, but they haven't been tested. And then in addition to those two bills, every year 8 or 10 states introduce something similar, and they generally die in committee. The current flavor of those bills are academic freedom bills. They're all aimed at the same thing, which is to make it possible for a teacher to teach creationism and not get in trouble. We'll be interested to see if, with the election of the Trump administration, if some of those bills make it a little further. The other big development, though, 6 or 7 years ago, we started to notice that climate change was turning up in those bills. So where the bills used to say teachers should be able to teach the strengths and weaknesses of evolution, and they almost always mention stem cells, they started also mentioning climate change. So NCSE decided 5 years ago to add the teaching of climate change to its mission, so that we now want to make sure that every science teacher in the country feels confident and supported in teaching the established science of evolution and climate change in their science classrooms. The opposition to climate change is not religious in nature, it's more political and ideological. And because it's not religious in nature, it's not constitutionally prohibited. So our efforts with the teachers are aimed much more at providing them with the scientific expertise that they need to teach the topic. If they live in a community where a lot of people are doubtful about climate science, then they might feel uneasy about bringing it up for fear of getting pushback or complaints from parents or from their colleagues. So it's almost more of a sociological process to make sure that they understand that the science is established.
How is NCSE addressing the issue of good news clubs appearing in American schools, whose mission it is to indoctrinate children before they are old enough to question what they hear?
What we tend to counsel, rather than trying to shut down religious activities, it's more effective to provide counter programming, as it were, that if this good news club is claiming to be science enrichment, then start a real science enrichment club where kids get hands-on experience with investigating issues that are interesting to them, and that where people are guiding them into where would they find the reliable data to answer their questions, how can they gather that data on their own. It much more seems to me effective to provide something positive than to try to shut down something that other people see as a positive. We have started a pilot program in Iowa that we call NCSE Science Booster Clubs, and they're not specifically school-based, they're community-based. And the idea is to rally the people in the community who think that science is important and give them a template for bringing really friendly, accessible, hands-on science activities to community events like farmers markets or county fairs. And all of our activities are focused on either evolution or climate change, but they're very non-confrontational. They're just an opportunity for people to come along and with their own hands do an experiment. And it's taken off in a way that we didn't anticipate. I think my vision for this 2 years ago was that these groups would do activities as fundraisers than really as an effort to do any kind of mass outreach, and that they would then provide grants to local science teachers to go and do professional development or to buy things that they needed for their labs, or much more direct support, in other words, of the science teachers in their communities. And that certainly has happened. These 4 now clubs in Iowa have provided grants to 14 teachers. But what has really taken off that I didn't anticipate is the hunger in the public for these informal science activities. I guess we're coming up now on 20 months, they have reached over 55,000 Iowans.
Wow.
At these events. I know, it's amazing, isn't it?
Yes, it's very exciting.
With absolutely no negative pushback, including this summer, they had a large booth at the Iowa State Fair. It was in the same pavilion as Answers in Genesis's big creationist booth. And it was all about evolution in Iowa. The Natural History Museum of the University of Iowa lent them a whole series of gorgeous fossils, and the display was about the evolution of Iowa, and it had pictures of what Iowa looked like at different time periods with the fossils and a story about where the fossils were found, because they were often found by farmers in their cornfields or by, when they were building a road, they found, this bone or that shell, so that it made it very, very personal and local. And people just flocked to it. Everybody in the community who feels that having the kids get a great science education is a high priority, and that science becomes a part of daily life in the community. What we've diagnosed is that there are really far too many Americans who are pretty much completely alienated from science. So when something like climate change comes along, and there's a huge effort to cast doubt on it, when the fossil fuel industry has spent millions and millions of dollars to make people question whether the scientists are on the up and up, and people haven't had any exposure to science for 10 or 20 years. And even when they did take science in high school, they might have felt that it was boring, or they weren't smart enough, or they certainly didn't leave school with the idea that science is a tool that they can take with them for the rest of their lives and apply to figuring out what's going on in the world. Then it becomes, for me anyway, it becomes much easier to understand why so many people sort of shrug their shoulders and say, I don't know whether climate change is real or not. I'm not a scientist, and gee, it sure seems to me like everybody in our community thinks that the scientists are saying the sky is falling because they want more research money. It's a very easy case to make if people don't have any personal relationship to science. And what these clubs seem to be able to do is to give people a chance to re-engage with science in a very friendly, non-condescending, in an atmosphere where they can feel like a science insider rather than, here comes the famous scientist to tell you what you should think.
When did science become completely incompatible with religion in America? For instance, you could believe that God set evolution into motion all those years ago, but increasingly it seems like for religious folk it has to be one or the other.
Well, I think that it's only true of a minority of Christians. I think that there was a little bit of bleeding over from that minority Christian view into a little bit more of the mainstream of Christianity when, as you mentioned, religion became fundamentalist religion became part of the political landscape in the 80s under Reagan, and that it has that minority Christian view has so much power in the Republican Party that a lot of Republican politicians, even if they themselves would not call themselves young earth creationists, they feel like they have to be respectful toward that point of view, that it's only fair to teach both sides. I don't think that they have the kind of emotional attachment to creationism that this minority of fundamentalist Christians do, where for them, as you say, it's one or the other. You either believe in the literal truth of the Bible and you're saved, or you start to question any part of the Bible and you are doomed. It's a real matter of their identity.
What else is NCSE doing to help?
The only thing we didn't talk about is that one of the other ways we are trying to support teachers is to recruit early career scientists, like graduate students, to go into classrooms and help teachers when they're covering evolution and climate change. And we have two goals there. One is just to have students meet a young scientist so that they can get an opportunity to see that scientists are real people who don't look so different from themselves, who are women, who are people of color, who are not with gray hair and white lab coats. So that's goal one. And then the second goal is that for these teachers who are a little concerned about tackling evolution or climate change in their communities, or that just feel like they don't have the content knowledge to be confident when they teach, having a scientist in the classroom to do an activity with them helps them feel more like the scientific community is there to help. So that's another program that we're piloting across the country. We're generally running about 25 to 30 partners per semester, and this is our fourth semester. And that seems to be working really well. It's the challenge is finding a teacher and a graduate student within driving distance of each other. So we have a program for graduate students to sign up for NCSE membership for free. So if any of your listeners are graduate students themselves or they have graduate students in their labs, I'd encourage them to go to ncse.com and take advantage of that free membership. And if they want to sign up to be a scientist in the classroom, we will do our best to find a local teacher for them to work with.
What about girls in science? You reminded me that's a hot button issue for a lot of folks, that there's not enough women who get interested in science. Are you seeing an upturn in the number of girls who are embracing science? And do you do anything specifically there, or you kind of count it all?
We don't. There are a lot of groups that do, and I certainly think that when a 24-year-old woman comes into the classroom with her bird nets and her tags to show how she studies migration, that gets a message across both to the girls and the boys in the class. I think nationally what they're seeing is that lots and lots more women are going into science, many more into biology than to physics, for example. But even physics is seeing more women go in, more women get PhDs, more women get entry-level academic jobs. You're still seeing a huge fall off at that point, that women are much less likely to persist through the academic mill to become associate and full professors to get tenure and continue in the field. Of course, with the funding levels at where they are now, it's persistence in science is at an all-time low. It's just really hard to get established, and that seems to be disproportionately affecting women and people of color. But I'd say the lower school system, the K-12, is doing a much better job generally with getting girls interested in science. It's after that the problems start.
How can people get in touch with NCSE if they need your help?
We are on the web at ncse.com. There is an ncse.edu and an ncse.org. Neither of them are us.
Nice.
We're ncse.com. And we, as I said, this Booster Club project, we just started about a year and a half ago. We are expanding it this year, but we're already full for our first wave of expansion. We're going to have 18 clubs by the end of 2017. So if anybody listening is interested in starting a club, please go ahead and get in touch with us, and we'll put you on the list for 6 months to a year from now when we can handle another wave of clubs. If any of your listeners are teachers and would like any advice on where they can get really good teaching resources for climate change or evolution, where there are good professional development opportunities for learning the science of those fields, or definitely if they're having any problems with people suggesting that they shouldn't be teaching evolution or climate change, or how to handle it appropriately in the classroom, we can definitely help. And we're still available to help parents and community members who are concerned about things that are going on in their schools, as you mentioned with your after-school club. We still, although we are turning very much towards more positive support to try to stop these problems before they get to the point of needing intervention, we're still definitely available to help if something comes up.
Ann Reed, thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for all the great work you do. Keep it up.
Oh, thank you very much. I appreciate talking to you.
Special thanks to the Smartass Atheist Guild for promoting the Underground. Look for them on Facebook and like them. That's Smartass Atheist Guild, your guild for atheist smartasses, on Facebook.
And now it's time for everybody's favorite filthy puppet.
Hellmo.
Grazie a tutti ragazzi. My name is Hellmo, and this is Hellmo's Underworld. Today's episode, she's bringing to you by the lung cancer. That's right, keep smoking, idioti. Today, Hellmo gonna talk to you about these, ¿cómo se dice, creationisti? Creationists! It's a creationist, huh? You know about this payachi, huh? This is the people who think the world is only 6,000 years old. I'ma tell you something. In the old country, in the basement, Hellmo got 2 bottiglie di vino, tu capisci, eh? 2 bottles of wine older than 6,000 years. Now, if you are stupido, you are stupido. It's your business. But when you lie to the bambini about the shit that everybody know, in the whole world, everywhere, when you lie to the little bambini innocenti, the little innocent children who gonna believe you when you lie to them with your stupid bullshit, well, then Hellmo, he's gonna fuck you. So, we're gonna do a bit every show called Crap. Creationist Asshole of the podcast. It's gonna be good. And now, here, to take his very first crap.
Good luck with your first crap.
Is a young Bobby Science.
Thanks, weirdo. Hellmo. The very first crap on the Atheist Underground is none other than Vice President Mike Pence. That's right, fans. The US VP is a creationist creep. The man who is one heartbeat away from the most powerful position in the world doesn't accept scientific fact. He even tried to convince Indian lawmakers to include the teaching of creationism alongside evolution in schools. Apparently because Indiana is not backwards enough. Don't believe me? It's on YouTube. In this video, Mr. Pence reveals his lack of understanding not only of evolution, but of the word theory itself.
Charles Darwin never thought of evolution as anything other than a theory. He hoped that someday it would be proven by the fossil record, but did not live to see that, nor have we.
Yes, we have. The fossil record clearly supports evolution. The theory is referred to as fact because it's both.
Every signer of the Declaration of Independence believed that men and women were created and were endowed by that same creator with certain unalienable rights.
That's because they signed it 85 years before Darwin's voyage. They didn't know what we know now.
I believe that God created the known universe, the earth, and everything in it, including man. And I also believe that someday scientists will come to see that only the theory of intelligent design provides even a remotely rational explanation for the known universe.
Remotely rational. Sounds like a good nickname for you, genius. Does anyone else think Mike Pence's last name is a British word for what his thoughts are worth? Poor Mike Pence. He makes no sense. Thankfully, the Supreme Court ruled in 2012 that intelligent design was plain religion and unconstitutional to teach in public schools. Lie to your own kids, Mike Pence. You are today's creationist asshole of the podcast. Take him out back behind the woodshed, weirdo. Hellmo.
Okay, asshole. Andiamo. Let's go.
Thank you, sir. May I have another? Thank you, sir. May I have another? Thank you, sir. May I have another?
Here now with secular news and events is Jojo Van de Scoop.
In Russia, atheist blogger Ruslan Sokolovsky went on trial for inciting religious hatred for playing the game Pokemon Go in a Russian Orthodox church last August, which he posted to YouTube. He was also charged with insulting the feelings of religious believers. If convicted, Ruslan faces a possible prison sentence of 7.5 years. The human rights organization Amnesty International has condemned his detention, calling Ruslan a prisoner of conscience. The Freedom from Religion Foundation has sent a letter to Longwood, Florida Mayor Joe Durso requesting the removal of a cross honoring veterans from the City Hall building. The cross bears the inscription, "We will never forget their sacrifices." FFRF argues while they have no objection to honoring veterans, the cross sends a message that the government only cares about Christian veterans. Longwood Mayor Durso says the cross should stay in City Hall, saying, "It was a really generous donation from a veteran who lives in the city of Longwood." An after-school program called the Young Skeptics Club recently started at Harlow Elementary School in Arroyo Grande, California. The club strives to teach youth critical thinking skills. Atheists United Group of San Luis Obispo selected Harlow Elementary because of its large size and also because the school offers a good news club, an evangelical club focusing on biblical teaching. Some parents are criticizing the Young Skeptics Club, claiming the concepts they teach are too advanced for elementary school children. In Atheist Convention news, ReasonCon 3 will take place Saturday, April 22nd at the Crown Plaza in Hickory, North Carolina. Speakers include Lawrence Krauss, Matt Dillahunty, and Callie Wright. Event tickets are on sale at reasonnc.com/store, along with sponsorship opportunities.
Thank you for joining us in New Evidence. Now get your asses back on the train. Brighton is next down the line on the Atheist Underground Psychological Emancipation Railway. Brighton is next, where we will examine and perhaps take the piss out of everything bright. Cheers.
This podcast is sponsored by Craft, the Kenosha Racine Atheists and Free Thinkers. Hey, mister, mind the gap.